Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for helping out at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, finding out about all the stuff we are involved in, especially as election season gathers around. Though we're a 501c3, we certainly put a lot of policy positions out there, and then go ahead and ask the candidates that are looking for these midterm seats what they think of the things that we've presented for you. Joining us now, though, is somebody who has really been a great power and continues to be in, I don't know if it's a good phrase or not. I've heard it, and I don't know whether people like it or not. Citizen journalism, and from the Young Voices organization, their Mid-Atlantic director, Gabriella Hoffman, is back on the program with us. Gabriella, welcome back. How are you doing this weekend?
I'm doing well, Joe. Thanks for having me on again.
Well, and thanks for doing what you're doing, because so many people see and hear things and they want to get those out into the world. And unfortunately, those who can, we like to call them the authoritarians, those who have power and want to keep it, generally have gotten better and better at brushing it off and managing to silence it. So work like yours is very important as far as I'm concerned, to make sure that when a citizen journalist sees something and records something and wants to get it out there, they know how to do it without having it dispatched as just like, oh, it's just some grainy, Zapruder film kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the importance of people using their very expensive smartphones is extremely important, and also going to events and traveling the country, if you have the capacity like I do, to meet with people, record their remarks, and put it out there as written articles or in video format is extremely important, so you can relate better to people outside echo chambers, outside the Beltway, and know what's actually happening across the country. And so it is extremely important that a regular person or someone who's a freelance journalist can do that. And we partly encourage that at Young Voices, more so with commentary work, but we do have people who are journalists come through our program and try to sharpen their skills even on the commentary side.
It certainly is no more obvious than here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I don't know if anyone actually hears about what happened in Loudoun County if it wasn't for citizen journalists recording the meltdown at the school board meeting, where that so impassionately grieving father went after the school board, and their work forced the rest of the journalism world to say, hey, what's going on here? Because we've gotten to a point where journalism has become so centralized, professional journalism, that local radio shows are so hard to come by, that, if you're waiting for Fox News to follow a local school board, you're going to be waiting a while. So it is at that level where so much of our liberties are being dragged away. Gabrielle, is that a fair point?
It is. And I think you alluded to the work of Luke Rosiak and the other reporters who helped uncover that story in Loudoun County. It's individuals, it's concerned parents, it's young people, it's older people who recognize, like you said, that you can't wait for Fox News, essentially. Nothing wrong with Fox News. You just can't wait for them to create news. You can identify something that is being ignored. There are a lot of issues here in the Commonwealth, even outside of education. I think you've had guests on to talk about that big offshore wind farm, the really complicated nature, the expensive nature, and the arguably economically ruinous and also environmentally ruinous nature of that project. It's not really getting much attention except for the Wall Street Journal. So there are things within, let's say, our Commonwealth and individual states that are not getting that much exposure because lots of other topics obviously occupy the news cycle. So it's important for those in different states, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, for instance, to identify different stories. You brought me on previously to talk about the freelancer livelihoods and legislation imperiling that. That's still a very big concern here in our Commonwealth and also across the country. Not getting as much attention, but they're trying to do a lot of rulemaking, and you can talk to people in individual states and they'll tell you why that's a problem. But we have a governor, thankfully, who respects freelancing and doesn't want to erode that. But there's so many issues percolating that you can, as a regular person, a citizen, someone who's dispatched to do freelance commentary or even journalism work, you can identify something. Maybe the local news is covering it, but you want to highlight it more. And you can tag people on social media who have influence people often tag me in stories. And if I think it's interesting and it's credible, then I can retweet it. So those of us who have platforms and followings can identify stories that others have started to cover, give them obviously the proper due and credit, not take their credit. That's also another problem too. Sometimes big news entities will see a story and then they don't give the credit to the original reporter.
Right.
I don't believe that. I think you have to honestly give someone their credit where credit is due. But certainly, yes, a lot of local stories can become national stories. In my writing career alone, that's how I started. I always tell young writers behind me that if you want to make it, don't start off national. I said, start with your backyard, start with local issues, your county, your localities, your state, and then work your way up to national, because you're competing with a lot of people for the national beat. Everyone wants to be a commentator or a journalist on the national scene. You're competing with a lot of people who sometimes take a lot of oxygen. So you need to find something that is not being covered extensively. Like you said, the Loudoun County issue is a perfect example, because people think because Loudoun and Fairfax counties are so far to the left, there are lost causes, you can't really focus on those areas. But a lot of attention is being drawn to, let's say, faults in ignoring people who abuse the system in schools. If you look at what's happening with respect to crime, some of the Commonwealth's attorneys are turning a blind eye to hardened criminals, letting them out early.
Yep.
We have that here in Fairfax County, where a criminal abused a minor and that person is not being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And so there's so many things you can find that some outlets are making notice of that others are not, and then really make a story of it. But obviously not making yourself the story, talking to people, getting their perspectives out there. And if you have the vehicle to communicate to lots of people, then you can obviously dispatch to regional papers, national news outlets. But obviously, I think it's very possible, even in this day and age with 24/7 news, to have a local story go national. That's how largely a lot of stories come to fruition, why they get a lot of national notice. Someone who is very keen on reporting put out their smartphone, they captured remarks, maybe they listened into a Zoom session, those, both in-person and non-in-person events. You have to start recording things if you're allowed to, of course, and the recording laws in your state. I think Virginia, we're maybe a one-person consent. I forget exactly the rule, but
single person.
Most people, single person, yes, recording. So you can obviously know the rules of the state in terms of recording. Most public venues, you're allowed to record unless they say otherwise. But there's a lot that can be done. And I think outside of my work with Young Voices, I've seen that personally with people who've risen to the scene as freelance journalists, as commentary writers. You have to make a name for yourself if you want to succeed in journalism. And I always tell people that journalism, it's really hard to do it full time, and it's okay to do it part time or per project basis or something. You don't need to be a full-time journalist to have an impact. That's what I always tell people as well. But start local and move your way up is the best path, definitely.
Gabriella Hoffman, Northeast and Mid-Atlantic Director for Young Voices. You can find her online at young-voices.com. Gabriella, as a consultant who works with people in getting the word out, we were talking about getting the story, but getting the word out in this world where I listen to folks like Mark Warner, Virginia Senator, talking about things they want to do to social media platforms, and it all smacks of the old days of the fairness doctrine, which had the most Orwellian name because it was used time and time again to silence opposition, and rather than making sure that these platforms were available but also understood their rights. Talk about young people or old people who are out there trying to do civilian journalism, and how they get their word out there through their own platforms, through their own mailing lists, and using social media as they can.
Absolutely. You certainly have to be aware of the threats by those on the left to make it harder for conservative speech to go out there. But I don't think I really want both sides coming together to kind of fundamentally transform social media in many respects, because I don't want to be held liable for comments that people post in my articles that I have nothing to do with. So I'm very concerned a little bit with, trying to regulate social media on both ends. I think social media companies too calling for regulation of themselves is very foolhardy, not very practical either.
And should tell you a lot about the regulations too. If they're like, "Oh, punish me,"
absolutely. Yeah, but I think on social media, as long as you're not, I think some conservatives fall into the trap of wanting to get themselves purposely banned on social media. I don't think that's effective. You don't want to be able to lose your platform. I think some of the things, on when different subjects are broached, when social media censors, that's absolutely wrong. But I think some people purposely do it to get attention, to get on national media, and then say, see, I was oppressed. And if you make that a constant habit, it kind of hurts your credibility. But in areas where the topics are extremely important and you shouldn't dilute or you shouldn't obfuscate the truth, and you see obvious suppression of that certainly needs to be, held to account. But I think most people can see what's happening on social media. I wouldn't say, you have to kind of incline yourself to self-censorship. You don't have to post about every single news story. I've learned for me, it's okay to not have a comment on every single news story. Stick with what you're comfortable with. But if you fear that, the big social media channels are not up to par for your standards, you can create a Substack. I mean, I think it's still worthwhile to have a presence. We want to reach people who don't agree with us. So I think having a presence on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is extremely pivotal, YouTube as well. But if you're like, I'm so over social media, I want to try something different. You have Substack, which is a great, I would say, disruptor in the email newsletter service. They respect free speech. You can build up an audience really quickly if you have unique content to share. So I know plenty of people, not personally, but anecdotally, who have really gone all in for a Substack newsletter, writing kind of free form there. Some people have been able to monetize it very successfully. Very prominent thought leaders and even regular people have been able to gain subscribers and make a profit from that type of outlet. And you're not going to be silenced as to what you remark, obviously, as long as it's not like libelous or scandalous in that respect, within the confines of the law, of course. But I think there are many ways you can communicate, and many people, many journalists, and I think I fall into this category myself, independent of my work with Young Voices. I've learned that you should be able to put out your own content without waiting for people. So I lean on social media to put out videos that I do with clients, my own type of video journalism work, or overviews of trips that I make and cool places I visit. So you can create content out there for people to consume. And if you know how to use SEO, you can have people discover your content who otherwise wouldn't. And so there are lots of different avenues in written form, through social media, through writing, lots of opportunities in traditional media to put op-eds, even with somewhat hostility that you find among some members of the press. Not all members of the press, of course, but I've noticed in regional papers here in Virginia, they've been very open-minded to allowing different points of view. We have a really good regional publication kind of spread all across the Commonwealth. I've been able to be printed in the Times-Dispatch, the Pilot, Bristol Herald-Courier. So they still respect different points of view for the most part, because they know we don't want to just, appeal to one subset of Virginia. We want to appeal to multiple people. So many different avenues. You can use new media, traditional media. You can use dispatches through Substack, plenty of ways to get your things out there, and podcasts too.
You mentioned all the different ways. Now, you have a contributor program at Young Voices, and tell us a little bit about that, Gabriella.
Yeah, absolutely. So we bill ourselves as a PR firm for heterodox views. We largely have contributors who span across the center-right spectrum. And even if someone may be a little bit on the left, but they agree with some common area, liberty-minded values, we even will accept them if that's their focus area too. So we try to bring on different heterodox views, largely of the center-right, for those between the ages of 18 to 35. Like you mentioned, I cover the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast regions, and I look as it currently stands right now, ahead of our winter upcoming session, I'm looking for people here in Virginia and across the Mid-Atlantic and all the way north to Maine to join our contributor program who want to polish their skills, whether they're already established as a media personality or they're looking to get published or printed for the first time. We also offer various different tracks. We have a writing track, a speaker's track, and a commentary track. The latter two tracks you can do after you successfully complete the contributor program, doing 6 months of writing. And then in our alumni tracks, you could do also speaker and commentary work. But we've had a lot of people come through the pipeline. I myself have graduated through the program as well, and it's helped me tremendously even become better as a commentary writer, as a public speaker, things of that sort. So it's benefited someone like me who's been writing for the better part of a decade, and it's helped a lot of people who have upstart careers really take off across media. So it's a great program. You can focus on different niche areas. And you can become a subject matter expert across many, many different subsets of topics as well. So we have a group of editors, we have media people who will pitch you as well if you cross certain thresholds, and through the contributor program you do well, you meet the tasks, and they recommend that you can do TV or radio too, even within the contributor program at times. So we like to cultivate commentary writers and future thought leaders, and really help them get a step up in an otherwise very difficult media landscape to do so. Because if you don't really go through programs or fellowships like this, it's really hard to break out.
Gabriella, and I so appreciate that. I recall 15 years ago when I first moved to Charlottesville, I noted that the University of Virginia has, at minimum, conservatively speaking, 3, you could make a case 4 divisions of the school, whether they be academic or just think tanks dedicated to government and the study of government and the managing of government, and no journalism school. And I thought that was horribly imbalanced, and I thought it spoke volumes about where we were going as a country then. And I'm glad that you guys are standing up to do your part to push back against that, because we need people with pen and pad in hand, metaphorically. Could be an iPad, I guess. And I thank you so much for it. Again, it's young-voices.com. And thanks for joining us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Thank you for having me. Happy to share the good word of Young Voices.
And thank you all for tuning in this week. Next week, it is our Federation for American Immigration Reform Feet to the Fire special. Names like Tom Homan, Mark Morgan, Ken Cuccinelli, Jim Jordan, all coming up for you next week. Until then, for the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, my name is Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.